Ready for a test yet, Robert? Testing 1, 2. Right. Good evening and welcome back to the Governance and Audit Committee meeting. Apologies that we need to go into a closed session there, but there were some confidential matters that needed to be discussed without the public involvement. But the rest of our meeting, I can assure you, will be in public. So before we went into closed session. Richard Carr, the Interim Managing Director of Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited, and Councillor Martin Warnes, the Chair of that company, had given us a summary and a brief introduction to item 9 on the agenda papers. So I'm now going to open item 9 to questions or comments from members of the committee. Any questions or comments? I'm not seeing any indications this day. Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. I do. I'm just trying to find my way through the myriad of paperwork that we have here. So allow me to start with a general sort of question. These kind of restructuring activities are going to take some time, whether we go for hibernation or we go for dissolution or something in between. Do we have any idea what the costs of that will be generally, and specifically what will we need to spend on external advice and support to make that happen? So I think it's important before we make a recommendation to Cabinet that we understand what this could potentially cost. And that's the first question. And the second question is, has anyone thought about the mechanisms for transferring assets back into the council and how we do that? Because I assume that we're going to need to do it at a market value or a fair market value, and therefore we're going to have to pay money from one company to another to then wind up the company separately or hibernate the company. I just don't want to end up with cash trapped in the wrong place, as it were.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think some of the answer, if I recollect properly from reading this document, is in there, but I'm just going to pass back to Richard Carr to appraise us of the detail, if I can. Thank you, Richard.
So I think your question about the cost of implementation. So I guess in real terms, I think it's less of a cash expenditure item. It's a bit of a management time focus, because clearly we need to make sure these proposals, if they are supported, are enacted appropriately. And I should say, without preempting any decisions that you may have made or may come to, we've done a fair bit of work on transition planning, implementation planning, so we can try and move forward as expeditiously as possible. If you approved the proposals, or if the council approves the proposals for the hibernation of Kale, particularly based on the second item on the agenda, then we are pretty much at the end of that process, bar the transaction itself, which your 151 officer will be working through and I think advising the Cabinet on as part of that decision. In practice, there are very few assets actually under the Amphora umbrella, particularly relating to the bits of the business that we're talking about hibernating here. What it comes down to in essence, are the boreholes that have been created by the energy company, and there is one property that Amphora Homes owns, but that is largely the extent of the assets. Your question about external advice, I think we will need to follow for Amphora Homes similar process to the one that we have with legal support, doing all the due diligence that is a reflection of that bundle of papers, I'm afraid, that represents the next agenda item. So there is some cost there, but it's from memory a few thousand rather than anything more dramatic than that. Then I think there's the need to just take into account, well, what would be the consequences of not hibernating or in some way bringing these companies to an end? And in essence, I think it would require the council to continue to stand by the liabilities that are being created. So we're not quite in blank check territory, but you have been standing behind these companies, and all the time they're in a situation where they have no realistic prospect of generating a return that recovers their costs for the time being. Then that, for me, doesn't feel a sustainable position, frankly.
Thank you. Councillor Smithson, are you happy with that? Right. Any other questions or comments now you've managed to find your way back to the agenda?
I'm still thinking about them.
Right. Anyone else? Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a gentle reminder that before private session you did say you would explain for the benefit of the public who are tuned in the difference between all these various options, so we can be crystal clear what we're all talking about here. Thank you.
You're quite right. Thank you for reminding me. So, I mean, there were a number of things that were talked about in the introduction when we were still in public session. So I think so that members of the public understand, we are talking about Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited, which was a private company that was set up half a dozen years ago. And that company has 3 trading arms that are referred to as Amphora trading arms, one of which is a company working on energy and sustainable energy provision. The other one was looking at providing housing and making a profit out of private housing, but also using those profits to produce social housing, affordable housing for the residents of Colchester. And the third of those trading arms of Amphora operates the events and the helpline activity and the CCTV. I knew there was one I nearly forgot there. So those are the 3 trading arms of the Colchester Commercial Holdings Company. And they are, it was an arm's length company that was set up by the council 6 years ago. 6 years ago, yeah. And I'm just trying to remember whether there was anything else that was referred to. Richard?
So I think your question specifically was around the term hibernation.
Yes.
And effectively what that entails is putting those companies into a dormant state. They would not be trading, but they would not be completely extinguished. They still exist in legal form, even though they're not trading. And the rationale behind hibernation, as distinct from complete dissolution, which is an option, is absolutely an option, is simply that it gives the council the option of reactivating these if at any stage in the future circumstances changed. So I try to position these proposals as a reaction to a change in external environment. And I don't think any of us can know whether that environment may change yet again at some stage in the future. So it's simply giving you that option, but it would be equally entirely feasible to completely dissolve those companies if you chose to. the process of doing that is very similar to hibernation, but that's the distinction.
Thank you, Richard Carr. And the rationale for dissolution or hibernation, I think, is contained in quite some detail in the papers that are in front of us this evening. Councillor Smith? Sorry, Councillor Naylor again.
So I, and it may be in the papers, I'm also suffering from, what's it, 200 and something papers. Anyway, the point that just occurs to me is, if there's in the near future unlikely to be a change, is that not just another lot of expense, the same amount of expense, that we're simply kicking the can down the road? Why not simply dissolve the companies if they are of no use currently?
Can I suggest that we look at that when we move to the next item, because that's when we'll either recommend hibernation or not, and that will give us the opportunity to have a look at what the pros and cons of both are. Councillor Smith.
So I was going to follow on from that point, so I think you're quite right in indicating that we should really discuss that in the next item, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, very interesting debate. I've read the item 2 or 3 times. As far as I'm concerned, the people outside of this room, Chair, care not a jot about whether it's public or private finance that's dealing with this and who runs what. It's more interesting they are understanding, and they do understand because they're living and breathing it. There is a challenging and changing economic situation in their own streets, their own homes, in their own businesses, in the way they conduct their daily life. And this is recognising that, isn't it? As Richard has already said, the risk, and we have to be risk averse, I believe, as a council, because it's not our money. I think that's already been said in times before. So whether it's closing them down or whether it's recognising there could be a facet for those companies to come alive at some future date, or hibernation. And if hibernation doesn't cost anything and removes the risk and liability, we all understand what liability is and what risk is, and I think we have to recognise that with the report that's in front of us, I certainly think that I'm leaning towards the hibernation, and I think that's the right way to do it. I'd never heard of a corporate landlord before, but I have now, and I understand in the paragraph what that means, and absolutely fine with that. It means that the corporate landlord turns over to the leader of the council and his team, and Pam Donnelly and the team, and that's fine for me. I mean, we can manage that as a council, can't we? And I'm supportive of the idea at this stage of the hibernation as described in these papers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Did I say, yeah, Councillor Smithson? I thought I saw another hand.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can just clarify something, picking up on something Councillor Harris has just said, this doesn't eliminate the risks. It transfers the risks back to the council from the commercial organisation. So one of the questions I have is, have we adequately assessed those risks, and what additional costs will the council bear from things like having to secure boreholes and make sure that people don't fall down and those sorts of things? Is there a liability issue that changes as a result of putting it in the council versus it being in a private company?
Good question. Richard?
So thank you, and you're entirely right in your assessment of the position. The asset transfers to the council, therefore any risks associated with the asset transfer to the council. In practice, I don't think that represents a substantial change in the current position. And the reason for that is this, that in reality, Kale is not able to recover the costs it expends. And therefore the council stands behind that position. So in practical terms, I don't think it represents a change in the city council's exposure.
Is that? Yeah. Councillor Sunnock.
Yes, much bigger figures around the grants we've received. I think there's about 3 grants that have been received into this. I think one of them's a Homes England one from the Department of something, and another from the Department of something else. And they all have secret terms, which we're never allowed to see, transparency again. And the question is whether, I mean, I would completely, I've been finance director of companies with hundreds of subsidiaries. You'd never dissolve them immediately. You'd always give yourself a couple of years breathing space. In this case, hibernation has to be right, because it may be these schemes will come back and the structure could be really useful. It's also a very useful parrot, or dead parrot, or the parrot we can say, if one of those departments comes after their grants back. So I'd favour hibernation.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnock. Those of us of a certain age will remember Monty Python and the Dead Parrot sketch. Others won't. Richard, I don't know whether there's anything you want to just add in response to Councillor Sunnock's comments there.
I think that's a very helpful way of describing the situation, and actually it's what I would say, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully, we are in a public meeting. It would be very unhelpful if particularly one of those government departments formed the view that the council was still not interested in exploring the delivery of some of these projects. So I think I better stop there.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yes, I mean, I'm actually quite enthusiastic about the prospects for the energy operation. The key problem is, of course, there's no customers for it at the moment, because we had intended, had the economy been different, COVID not happened, whatever, there would be hundreds of houses there taking the energy. There'd be a care facility taking that energy. It would have the potential to be highly profitable, particularly given the increases in energy prices that we've seen. However, without any customers there at the moment, we clearly should be hibernating it, but it's a hibernation which I think will end in a revival in a spring when the customers return and when we get that position. And as a private investor, that looks a very good proposition at the moment. The fact that it's not available to produce income today is unfortunate, but I think in the future that's going to become a potentially very useful financial investment, but also an energy efficient way of heating homes in a low carbon, or in fact it might be zero carbon. I'll let other experts debate that point, but I think there's great potential there. So I would hate to see that company being dissolved. And I do agree with Councillor Sunnock that from the financial viewpoint, it makes absolute sense to hibernate the companies at this stage rather than wind them up.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other indications at this stage. So item 9/7, the paragraph 2 just asks us to recommend, or we are recommended rather, to consider the proposed future strategy for Amphora that's set out before us, supported by the board of Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited, and to comment as necessary before commending it to Cabinet. I think we've commented, and unless anyone suggests otherwise, we commend it to Cabinet. Right. Thank you. So that moves us on to the other item around Amphora, and that's the future strategy for where we are asked about, and it's item 10 on your papers. And I think I'm just going to ask Richard very briefly, because I think we've already touched on most of this, to outline what's, or to summarise as an introduction what's in that document. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And in effect, this is giving the final go-ahead to complete the hibernation, the proposed hibernation of the energy company, It follows a process of due diligence that we have undertaken with legal advisors. So it covers the treatment of all third-party contracts that are currently in place that the energy company has entered into. Some you'll see the proposition is that they are moved across to the City Council, others that they are extinguished. And I apologise for the length of the documents that are associated with this, but we have taken that legal advice as to what form of words, what process is necessary to give effect from hibernation. And I hope we may have given some insight into why we're recommending hibernation rather than complete extinguishing of the companies. I think we've largely rehearsed that issue. So I'll stop there. A lot of paper, but essentially that's what it does. And if I can just warn you that based on the decisions you've just made on the previous item and subject to the Council's Cabinet accepting those, we'll need to do something similar for our homes as well.
Thank you, Richard. Questions or comments? There are several things that we're invited to do this evening that are in paragraph 2 of the document. Any comments that nobody's had the opportunity to make so far? Okay, I think we've already done that. So we're not asked to make a decision because we don't have that authority, but we are asked to commend, having looked in detail at this, to commend to Cabinet. And we're asked to, well, we've heard what's been suggested around placing kale into a dormant state, so hibernating kale. There's information about the contracts and arrangements that are outlined in 2.2, 2.3. We've had some discussion about previously, and finally the G&A committee acts as shareholder, so we're asked to agree those and to recommend that to Cabinet. All those in favour? Agreed? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And so we conclude item 9 and item 10 this evening, but we don't conclude our deliberations over CCHL. Bear in mind, it is on our work programme. We'll come back to it. We will be back looking at CCHL in the not too distant future. Thank you, Mr. Carr. Thank you for attending this evening, Alistair, and for your contributions, and Councillor Warnes as well. Thank you very much. So we'll go back now to item 7 on our agendas, and that's the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman's annual review letter. Mr. Weavers, you're going to introduce this for us.
I am. Thank you, Chair. Yes, before you, you've got the annual review letter from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. This report is the same report that was reported to Cabinet at its earlier meeting. The key headlines within the report are: there are no findings of maladministration against the council, which is good news, but there were two complaints rather, that were upheld but did not have any findings of maladministration, and they're set out in paragraph 5 of the report, Chair. That's all I draw to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor Harris.
Only a comment, Chair, really, just that, you know, Colchester Homes are very able. Their welfare facilities are second to none in my view as a housing association. I would say that, wouldn't I, as it belongs to the council and as an ALMO, but it's perfectly right and proper that the Ombudsman has dealt with this and CBH has dealt with it in the way that it's had. I would comment, it's strange though, well, perhaps not so strange, in the two items that were under the Ombudsman, both housing allocation in the cases, and it seems to me that I think sometimes we are a victim, and the Ombudsman is not allowed to take that into account, of the fact that we are got a dearth, we don't have enough council housing in Colchester, which means that we have to allocate houses that are not always fit that the tenant would like. And it's right and proper that they go to the Ombudsman and it's dealt properly. So I support the report, Chair, and I've got no other comment to make apart from that, and welcome the report that's in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I've had an indication from Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just having a look at this prior to this meeting, and it is a point of concern to me that 100%, albeit a low number, of complaints are upheld. That does concern me from a governance point of view, because I would presume that those complainants had already taken their complaint to the council and not had the correct outcome. So I am very concerned about that fact, notwithstanding any other points that members wish to make about the circumstances of any particular complaint. We're concerned with governance here, and to me that is not a good sign.
Thank you. And I think that's a relevant point, you know, that the two instances that weren't taken to the Ombudsman were upheld. So I'll just pass back to Mr. Weavers to answer whether or not there's been any learning from that, or whether there's likely to be any ongoing learning from that.
Yes, thank you. That is a really pertinent question. Both of the complaints obviously had gone through Colchester Borough Homes complaints process. The complainants both didn't feel as though their complaints had been dealt with appropriately, so as per their rights they were entitled to go to the local government ombudsman, and they did so, and as you say, we have the findings there. Colchester Borough Homes have changed processes as following learning from these complaints. So I think as long as Colchester Borough Homes is using it as a learning method to improve their customer interaction, then that's what we should support. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, just before I bring you back in, I noticed that the final paragraph from the Ombudsman says, "We were pleased to deliver an online complaint handling course to staff at CB Homes." So I think that shows that something's happened. My question from that would be, what are the outcomes of that learning? Back to you, Councillor Naylor.
I would agree with both of your final points there. I wonder though if some monitoring might be put in place rather than a sort of reactive, let's see what next year's letter brings. The concern I have as well is I think we just need to acknowledge that anybody who pursues their complaint through all of these multiple layers to its final appeal process will have found very challenging, and it makes me wonder if there is a sort of layer of complaints that don't go that far, and what happened in those cases. Just an observation, and just to also acknowledge that I think there was an element of protected characteristic about both of those complaints, which also troubles me greatly when we take into consideration how challenging it is for individuals to use the Ombudsman service. Most people find it quite tiring emotionally, because it in effect is having their clear need denied when it is an actual fact. Those are my observations.
And valid points. With regard to CBH, what I would remind you and all members of the committee that we have agreed now that as part of our workload on an annual basis, we will oversee and review Colchester Borough Homes. and Colchester Borough Homes also reports to the scrutiny panel. So between us, we should be able to ascertain whether or not things are improving to our satisfaction. In terms of reports of internal complaints, I'll pass over to Mr. Weavers because I know we get those.
Yes, Chair, you do get those, but I'm not entirely sure. I think you get those through Sam Preston's area rather than myself. But just going back to Colchester Borough Homes, I do know that these types of complaints are reported to the board, and so the board members should be looking into these as well. Hopefully we'll give you those reassurance.
Thank you, Mr. Weavers. And of course, board members include councillors. So we all political groups have a member on CBH board. So, Councillor Smithson, did I see your hand up?
You did, Chair, and I suspect I need to make a declaration of interest as a board member of CBH. And I suspect, Mr. Weavers, we need to have a conversation because I don't think I can sit here according to the new terms of reference that were published this year. Someone has inserted a thing that says board members of the commercial holdings companies cannot sit on G&A any longer. Literally just read it.
I'm glad you picked that up because I didn't, and I know we've had a conversation about another member previously, but it would be a shame that you would have to stand down. But if that is in fact the case, then we'll have to.
Yes.
I'll leave that for a discussion between yourself and Mr. Weavers. Yeah. I think we carry on because we're not considering CBH this evening anyway. So I don't think there's any difficulty with you continuing to participate in the meeting to the end of tonight's meeting. But I think that's probably something for you to discuss with Mr. Weavers prior to the next one.
Chairman, could I just say, nothing has been slipped in. It will have gone through full council, but you're quite right. We'll have a conversation about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think did we not approve that change at not the last full council meeting, but one before that? Yeah, because the last one was just about appointing aldermen, wasn't it? Okay. Anything else on this? So I think we're just asked to note and comment, aren't we, on this? I'm just going back to. Yeah. All right. Noted. So. Looking at the time, we're still, I think we'll deal with the health and safety report prior to break. So just for those of us who don't know, I'll ask Hayley to introduce herself and introduce the item to us. Thanks very much, both of you, for agreeing to wait a little while before we came to the health and safety report.
Absolutely fine, thank you, Chair. So yes, my name's Hayley McGrath. I'm the Council's Corporate Governance Manager, and in my team I have the responsibility for managing the health and safety function. And I'd like to introduce you to Lee Holden, who is our Health and Safety Manager. He's been with us since February, has hit the ground running and has quite extensively reviewed some of our health and safety policies and practices. So I thought it'd be very good for Lee to come along and meet you tonight, and also to answer any questions you might have in particular about health and safety, because he is far more of an expert than I am. So in front of you, I've put the annual health and safety report. There is no formal requirement for us to report to you on an annual basis, but it's good practice, because health and safety forms part of our risk management framework. And as part of your duties as a committee, it's to overview risk and make sure that we are managing those items appropriately within the organisation. So what I do for you annually is bring to you a summary of the work undertaken in the previous year, and also to review our health and safety policy for the coming year. As I say, there's no formal requirement to do that, but it's good practice to review on an annual basis to make sure it's still appropriate and fits our needs and purposes. So tonight you're asked to review the work that's been undertaken and to endorse, approve the policy for 23-24. So I was just going to go over very quickly some of the items in the report. I won't go into detail because it's in there, and obviously you can ask particular questions if you'd like to. But I just wanted to pick out some of the key work that's been undertaken during the year. So we have been able to implement a new health and safety management system. So our previous permanent health and safety officer resigned last year, and we had an interim health and safety manager prior to Lee's arrival. The interim health and safety manager was someone who is self-employed and has developed a health and safety management system himself that is used in lots of organisations throughout the country and has received several awards. And he came in and he actually implemented that system within Colchester free of charge. So he supports that. There is no charge for the health and safety management system. It's a very detailed system in terms of actually looking at the processes within each individual service area and a very comprehensive library of information and assessments for managers. So Lee is currently in the process of rolling that out across the organisation that will give us a very clear overview of how our health and safety risks are being managed. Also, a lot of work has been undertaken on fire risk assessments. We've got a rolling programme of those in all of our corporate buildings, ensuring that they're all safe and compliant. And one of the other key areas that we've been working on, and Lee particularly, is the Rowan House refurbishment and the reopening. So obviously the refurbishment has taken a little while, but to be able to reopen the building, there were several health and safety requirements that we had to implement, and Lee's been very instrumental in that. And we've also developed a new reporting system for incidents to make it easier for officers to be able to report incidents as they take place, and actually having that as an app that's available online and on their phones. We set out in section 5.8 some details about the health and safety incidents, and you can see there was just over 1,000 reported during the year. Now that's not incidents that have taken place, that includes near misses. And it's important that we include near misses in the reporting to ensure that we've got any trends identified and we can stop any significant incidents taking place, hopefully. We set out the number of incidents and reports via each service area, and as you can see, Leisure World tops the league table, which would be expected because that includes any users of the facilities who injure themselves while they're playing sport. So if they fall over or they sprain an ankle and they report it to staff on site, we record that as an incident. During the year, there were 2 serious incidents. Now they are RIDDOR reports. They're formal reports we have to make because of the nature of the incident. And Lee can go into more details of why we make RIDDOR reports and the requirements for those. They both related to sport-related injuries, and neither of them have resulted in any action being taken by the Health and Safety Executive. So set out in section 6 is the details for the Health and Safety Policy, which is at Appendix A. There are no changes proposed to the process that we use for managing health and safety, but the policy has been updated to reflect the new management structure at the Council. And it's whether you have any questions.
Thank you, and welcome, Lee. I promise you we don't bite. We might grill, but we don't bite. Questions, comments?
Yeah, just looking at the figures, there's quite a big increase, 21-22 to 22-23. Presumably, is that just better reporting, or was it that we were shut for a bit more in?
Over to you, Lee.
Thank you. Yep, I encourage all team members and managers to report for transparency. If we take Leisure World Colchester, I've done some calculations earlier. With participation, the accidents is actually 0.084%, so it's so low at Leisure World. However, though the figures here is obviously 556, when you take the amount of people entering that building, it's actually really low.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Jane? Yeah, I had a similar question about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
in terms of the actual encouragement, so using the new health and safety management system that we've got, the profile of health and safety has been raised throughout the organisation. So what's actually happening is we're receiving more reports. So the more that Lee is going out, and Lee has been meeting a lot of our officers on site and going through a lot of our processes and our functions, actually what happens then is we generate more reports in. So I don't think we're seeing a particular trend in an increase in incidents occurring. I think we're seeing more reporting coming through.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm particularly interested in the app, the Power app that you were talking about. Does that mean that all employees use their own phone to report that, or do they have to go to a manager or a supervisor to use that to report in? Because it's quite there's quite a good bit of innovation as far as I'm concerned. If you're using their own phone, and you just load the app up and report straight to you without having to get a report filled in. Sounds good.
So if I start from the beginning, the trial site is going to be Leisure World. That's the highest risk in my mind. We've been developing this over about a year. We've got a new web developer. What we're trying to do is make it simple for the staff to use and adhering to GDPR as well. The aim is to, for instance, at Leisure World, is to have a number of consoles units for the staff to use. They'll be located in key areas such as reception, first aid room, aqua springs, and potentially the gym. So when an accident does happen, they can use that console.
Going on from there, is there any plans to expand that to places such neighbourhood services, so even the refuse collectors can have that sort of stuff?
That's correct, yeah. So we wanted to, just to make sure that it works properly, the next service will be neighbourhoods.
Right, thank you. I mean, I'll just comment on that because until fairly recently, I worked in an organisation that did introduce an app several years ago and then introduced a QR code probably 18 months or so ago. It's great for people who are IT savvy. It wasn't so great for individuals who are less IT competent. So I think we just need to be mindful of that and ensure that all staff are familiarised with how to make it operate. Otherwise, we'll find that some are very good at reporting and others don't report at all because they can't get to grips with the system.
What we've done is at Leisure World, we've invited several staff at various different departments, age and ability, to come and use and comment on the app, and we've taken their views on board.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. I've got one because it always makes me smile when we do the review of the health and safety policy, when I look at the responsibilities. And Councillor David King is sitting right behind you, and what always makes me smile most is that the leader of the council is ultimately responsible for health and safety across the council, followed closely by the chief exec, of course, but nevertheless it falls to David. And also to Cabinet. My question, or my comment, I suppose, is what sort of understanding do we ensure Cabinet members, and the leader in particular, have about health and safety? I ask that, having been a health and safety representative for many a year, and knowing how complex it is and how complicated it can be. What do we actually do to support Cabinet members to undertake that responsibility?
I think that's a very fair question, Chair, in terms of their role and responsibility for health and safety is very clear. We do have conversations with them, but we don't have a formal training programme for them. So that's probably something that I will have a conversation with the leader about. We do it for senior managers. We've trained, including the chief executive, all the senior managers in health and safety. So it's probably something that I'll have a conversation with the leader about rolling out to Cabinet members as well.
Thank you, Haley. I think that's really good. It's good to hear that our senior managers are undertaking it, as they should. But I say, I looked at this and I suddenly thought, I've never asked that question before. And there's a reference in here to Cabinet responsibilities. And I was intrigued, I mean, 4.2, it talks about overall responsibility for health and safety and the Health and Safety Committee. And my adjunct question really is there a cabinet member who participates in the Health and Safety Committee, or at least has some involvement with the Health and Safety Committee, if, you know, it is their responsibility?
At this point in time, no. We have a senior manager who comes along, so the Chief Operating Officer comes along to the committee and would take back any concerns to Cabinet and to the leader in terms of health and safety functions. But obviously that's a conversation I'll have with the Chief Operating Officer about potentially having a Cabinet member as well.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Have there been any breaches of the health and safety policy by employees in the last 12 months?
We have no formal breaches. Obviously, when we have an incident, we review what's happened, we look at the incident report, we look at the risk assessment, and we consider whether there was anything in particular that caused that accident. But there is nothing to imply at this point in time that we've had any formal breaches of the policy.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other indications, so I think we were asked to review the health and safety at work that's been undertaken between October 22 and September 23, and to approve the health and safety policy for 23-24. All happy with that? Thank you very much to both of you for your attendance and your contributions this evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Looking at the time, it's just a few minutes to 8, and I have no doubt that the next item is going to exercise us for a little while. So I'm going to suggest that we have a break now until 8:10 sharp. So if you can all be back here, please, at 10 minutes past 8, we will reconvene then. Welcome back to Governance and Audit Committee. We just had a brief break. We're now moving on to item 11, draft statement of accounts for 21-22. I'll just remind everyone that these are now fairly old accounts. They have been published in draft form on the council's website, and they do relate to a period when we were coming out of COVID, so there will be some anomalies in them. That said, I'm just going to ask our Section 151 officer to briefly introduce them and then open up to questions and answers, comments, which I'm sure will only take us to about 8:15. Over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Yes, these are the 21-22 draft statement of accounts. They're actually published on the 15th of September 2023 to be precise, and after a bit of a struggle, the delayed audits, which is a national problem, as you'll be aware, has caused considerable disruption combined with shortfall in staff resources. But we got there in the end, and I've got my colleague Catherine Joblin online here to take any potentially difficult questions that I'm not able to handle, which is probably nearly all of them, I suspect. But without further ado, I think it's probably worth going over the questions that I have received in advance, very briefly, so for the benefit of the whole committee. So if you'll bear with me, with your permission, Councillor Smithson, I'll go through the questions that you asked and the responses to the rest of the committee. The question was asked by Councillor Smithson regarding page 111 in the reporting pack, which talks about the collection fund being in deficit. Is it possible to break down the collection fund out into amounts collected on behalf of other preceptors, which I assume are payable to them immediately, and amounts belonging to Colchester City Council? I'm also looking for clarification of the overall collection fund deficit once money belonging to other preceptors has been excluded. So in answer to the question, the collection fund deficit, there is a net deficit on the collection fund, which is unusually large, which I'll explain about in a minute, at 10.68 million. That actually comprises a surplus of 1.497 million on council tax, and that's offset by a deficit of 12.177 million on business rates. Now, that's not all Colchester City Council's liability, of course. The council share, this council's share of the overall collection fund deficit is actually 4.678 million, which comprises a surplus, a share of the surplus on the council tax of 192,480, offset by a deficit share, a share of the deficit on business rates of 4.871 million. So it is broadly correct that surplus, to say that surpluses and deficits are payable immediately. However, the precise payments are based on estimates made in January preceding the following financial year. So that allows the preceptors to set their budgets ahead of the financial year, with a degree of certainty around their funding streams. So, in other words, in this instance, the estimates would have been made in January 2021. Consequently, there's usually some small differences, plus or minus, around those estimates reflected in, but they are reflected in subsequent balances on the collection fund. And to sort of backtrack to the reason for the large deficit, that's down to COVID nationally, as well as at Colchester business rates. The council received substantial Section 31 grants in relation to business rates reliefs that were awarded at the time, and those balances have been held in the reserve and they're being gradually dripped through to the collection fund to fund the subsequent deficits. So if you look at note 11 on the statement of accounts, you'll notice that in the business rates reserve it has a large balance of 9.9 million at the end of 21-22. Well, that is basically, a lot of that is there pending transfer to the collection fund to fund future deficits. So it was met, the deficit was met from this source in 22-23. Moving on then, the question was raised as to whether the community stadium was included in property, plant and equipment figure and its net book and what is its net book value. I can confirm that the community stadium is included in property, plant and equipment with a net book value of 28.5 million as of the 31st of March 2022, and that's included in note 14, which is within the land and buildings balance. And also in terms of the revenue that the stadium generated in 21-22 was actually £176,524. Moving on then to VAT. I was asked to confirm that the council fell within the 5% insignificant test required for VAT recovery in 21-22, and has the council continued to do so in 22-23? The answer to that is yes and yes. The council's partial exemption, or de minimis position as it's known, where it's able to recover expenditure on exempt business activity to the extent that it comprises less than 5% of the overall total expenditure in any one year, means that it's able to fully recover its VAT on such expenditure. And I can confirm that the percentage for 21-22 was 1.86%, and for 22-23 was 1.63%, so well below the 5% de minimis level, which means that the council didn't suffer any VAT loss as a consequence. Moving on to Councillor Sunnock's questions. I've also received some technical questions from Councillor Sunnock yesterday covering reserves, the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, the balance sheet, the housing revenue account, and some inter-authority comparisons as well. Unfortunately, the key individuals in the finance team are tied up at the moment. We're trying to complete the preparation of the draft statement of accounts for 2023. So unfortunately, a response to all the questions raised will have to follow on from this meeting, I'm afraid. However, in the spirit of transparency, I have picked out some of the easier questions for people to follow in the meeting, taking one from each of the categories that were raised. So first of all then, on reserves, you observed that the opening reserves position in note 11 on page 146 of the report pack does not agree to the last year's closing reserves, and the difference is 5.07 million. This is quite correct, and it is disclosed as a prior period adjustment in note 27 on page 171 of the report pack, and I can confirm that the difference is indeed right to buy receipts, capital receipts. This is a deliberate change in classification in the 21-22 accounts to correctly accord with proper accounting practice. The original misclassification is in the draft 2021 statement of accounts. This will be corrected with the agreement that the audit is before those accounts are signed off. With regard to public scrutiny, the audited accounts are published in accordance with the audit and accounts regulations, so they will replace the draft accounts and will be published on the council's website in accordance with the regulations. And the auditors will of course update this committee eventually on the audit findings, and this usually entails a disclosure of significant accounting adjustments. Moving on to the comprehensive income and expenditure statement then, a reconciliation was requested between the £1.653 million deficit on the provision of reserves disclosed on the face of the comprehensive income and expenditure statement and the Q4 monitoring report, in other words, the management accounts. I can confirm that this is actually presented in note 5 to the accounts, which is the expenditure funding analysis note on page 133 of the report pack. And if you look closely, it actually cross-refers to the summary of the management accounts on page 12 as well. So I have checked it and it does agree, so fortunately. In terms of the balance sheet, you asked if we should disclose fair value of our debt, and as you say, we do benefit from fixed interest rates, and this is reflected in note 24 on financial instruments, which are on page 165 of the report pack. For example, it shows the council's outstanding PWLB loans with a book value of 132.094 million actually have a fair value of 148.225 million, and that's presented in note 24, as I say. Moving on to housing revenue account then, you asked if the £35 million DWP benefit subsidy disclosed in note 9 was included in HRA turnover. I can confirm that it doesn't, and that is a general fund item which is absorbed within the comprehensive income and expenditure account on page 117 of the report pack. And finally, in inter-authority comparisons, it's probably worth emphasising that inter-authority comparisons need to be overlaid with with appropriate context in order to obtain a reasonable like-for-like comparison. So, as well as the more obvious size differences based on population statistics, such as matters such as the level of outsourcing in an individual council, whether the council has an HRA account or not, etc., all have a major bearing on its financial figures and staffing levels, etc. With regard to disclosure, the question was raised as to the different reporting approaches, for example, Colchester Commercial Holdings or Amphora, as it were, compared to the council. Well, I can confirm that the respective parts of the council group, wider council family or group, if you like, in this context, are required to prepare accounts under different reporting standards. So, Colchester Commercial Holdings, for example, are prepared, their accounts are prepared under what's known as FRS 102, whereas council accounts are required to comply with full IFRS. There are different disclosure requirements on staffing, for example, to name but one difference, which is why you will see slightly different approaches between the two, between the respective partners. So I'm happy to open it up to any further questions, Chairman. Catherine is here to help online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that comprehensive introduction and responses to some quite significant questions that were put to you beforehand. I will just say to all members around the table that when we had our break, I did briefly have a chat with Councillor Sunnox and Councillor Smithson about their approval to circulate their questions and answers to all members of the committee, and they were both in agreement. So I'll ask Mr. Evans if following this meeting, you could ensure that that happens, please, because I think, you know, there are some fairly technical and complicated questions that have been raised, and not all of us will have been able to follow them fully in terms of the verbal responses that have been given, but really helpful, and thank you very much for that. I'm now going to open up to questions and comments. Just remind everyone, as Mr. Hartgrove already has reminded us, these are yet to be audited accounts, but through no fault of the city councils. We have fingers crossed that they will be audited sometime this decade. I think the expectation is that the expectation we were given a few months back was that they would be audited in the spring of next year, but that has seemed to have, that deadline seems to have slipped somewhat. So when we'll finally get them audited, who knows? But that's out of our hands. Open to comments, questions. I'm sure there are one or two other than those that we've already heard. Councillor Sunnock.
Yes, can we pick up on the audit point first of all? We were going to see some audits September, October this year. Has that been pushed back?
I'm trying to get an answer to that. I think it has been, yes, but I am trying to get confirmation.
Have we, when we had the auditors here, it became quite clear that we haven't delivered all the things they were expecting, and that was agreed. Has that now been completed?
Yes, the initial request for information, I'm advised that we supplied all of the information that they requested during September as per the agreement, but since then we're not getting any feedback. We would expect some supplementary questions and requests for supplementary information. That hasn't happened, it's gone quiet, and I am pursuing the auditors to get to the bottom of what the latest position is.
Well, can I just quickly come in there, because the information that was suggested that we hadn't provided, I believe that Andrew indicated to us at the last meeting that that had been provided, because that was a question. So we know that that has been done. I've attended a meeting of governance and audit chairs. I think it's a national one, on one or two occasions where it's been made quite clear that audits across the country are way behind. And I say, the latest position that I heard from that meeting was they were working towards spring, end of March next year. However, it's been suggested in the last week or so that timetable has slipped yet again. So I think no one around this table has any clear idea as of tonight when the auditors will actually get around to signing off our accounts for 21-22.
Well, if I can just make the point that these are really difficult, would be really difficult accounts to audit. It's reflecting an organisation that's grown tentacles all over the place, and a lot of things are presented in a very complicated, probably unnecessarily complicated way, and we shouldn't sit here blaming auditors entirely, particularly after what we heard last time. We should look in the mirror and we should try and get it there. We should try, I've suggested ways of being effective about pushing it over the line, but this doesn't seem to be something, I don't care about other councils, I care about this council. We should be taking very seriously and not just passing the buck. That's just, you know, I just want to make that point.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we're passing the buck. I'm just going to, the portfolio holder for resources is online, so I'm just going to bring Mark Corey in to comment on your query and your comment there, Councillor Sunnock. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to come up very clearly on this one. It is absolutely down to the auditors. It's absolutely down to the market. And in the other organisations across the public sector, they're having a similar issue. They are, government has tried to step in, but nothing has really come forward in this. The NHS is getting the highest priority, and we can understand why, because that can affect our residents even more greatly. It is simply because of the market and the inability for them to deliver. And quite frankly, I've listened to all of the meeting this evening, and this is where, when we had auditors that were within a government quango, it was much more effective than it is now in the private sector. And I'm glad to see some nods from the experts as well, including a retired banker next to you, Chris. And so I'm sorry, it's not about passing the buck. Our audits are just as complicated as other councils across the country. It's sometimes more complicated than the NHS, but we've got our statements here today, which is a good thing. I'm glad everyone's scrutinising those, but when it comes to that one point, there is no passing of the buck. They simply are not doing what they've been asked to do. And we pay for this, we pay for them to do it. I want it done as soon as possible so we can actually get on and get all of our accounts up to scratch, because we still are dependent on anything that they may find, of which typically they do not find anything too erroneous. There's small minor adjustments typically. But I just wanted to be clear about that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. I'll come back to you then, Councillor Sennett.
This is the one thing I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole on, but I just have to say how much I fundamentally disagree and how we could be doing so much more to be effective about getting this over the line. I see other people shaking their heads, but that's my view. Shall I move on?
Please do.
Okay. Then going back to the answer on the community stadium, I think we were told it was carried in the accounts at 28.5 million and that the income from it was 167,000. 176,000, yeah. My question is this, and it applies to all the way across it. How are we valuing such assets? Surely you can only value them off the income we're earning. And is that one of the sticking points with the auditors, that we're unable to evidence the cash flows that you'd expect from 28.5 million? You'd expect to be getting a cash flow of something, and or being able to show community benefits of something else. How is that? How is the valuation working? And I believe that should be, that those calculations should be in the public domain, at least during the month when after the audit's been done.
That's a valuation question. I am not sure whether Catherine can help at all on that, but could you, Catherine? I mean, we rely on the valuers that give us the valuations.
I was just trying to pick up that valuation, but can I respond after the meeting, because I haven't got that valuation in front of me, but I can give details on how that value is calculated. It is fair value, existing use value, but I don't actually know. It's not the investment properties are valued at market value, which is more sort of to do with the income, but this is a regeneration asset and it's valued at fair value existing use. But I will dig out the details for you and give you, more details on how it's calculated, but I just don't have it to hand, I'm afraid.
That's fine, Catherine, thank you. If you could just send that information to Matthew Heavens and then he can circulate it to the members of the committee, please. That would be helpful. Councillor Sonic?
Yes, going on to so the rules we're obeying, what I'm interested in, this is not because I've got an interest in reading accounting standards, because I'm not that sad. It's that I'm trying to understand what the council's financial perimeter is, where the limit, it's clear they can borrow effectively as much money as it needs. So I'm trying to find out what the limitations are, and it seems to be the reserves that are the limitations. So then I ask, what are the rules governing the reserves? And there's some quite well-written accounting policies in the accounts, but what are the rules? How close do we dare go before we are really in trouble with it? We need to know in clear terms where those lines are. And that's why I've spent some time going through the accounts, trying to work out what deficit spending we can continue doing and how long we continue doing it for. And what I've suggested in this question is that seems to be about 10.8 million of reserves available for deficit spending. There's lots of other reserves available for repairs and other things that we shouldn't really be plundering if they're genuine reserves. But what are the rules? Is 10.8 million where we are? If it is where we are, we seem to be running at a deficit of somewhere around 5 million a year at the moment. Is it a couple of years before we're seriously out of money, or is it more? Am I misunderstanding it?
Can I, just before you come in, Chris, just remind everyone that we're looking at the 21-22 accounts, not the current state of play. So try and stick to that, please.
I am.
Let me just finish, William, please. And the second point I was going to make is that towards the end of the month, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the date is, I think it was 28th, there is an event arranged for members by our Section 151 officer to look at council accounts. And I think some of the general questions and remarks that you have tonight, William, are probably best addressed there, because that comes to the heart of how council finances work. And I think that's a question that I'm aware we've needed to answer for every member of this committee for some time now, and also for all members of the council. So you'll be aware that I've been asking for that sort of training to be made available to everyone. And I think some of the points and questions that you're raising now are best left for that session. And I'd like you just to remain on song with the 21-22 accounts this evening, please.
The 21-22 accounts, the 10.8 million is quoted from them. We don't know what the figure for the next year is. And the figures I'm quoting for future forecasts are drawn directly from those accounts. So this is a third-party reader coming in here saying how much runway has the council got before it's in trouble. We publish those figures showing those 5 million deficits. So I'm trying to get, and I'm sure when we have the training session, there will be hundreds of different questions. I'm trying to focus on what image these accounts are giving and what they're actually trying to tell us. And I'm trying to see whether I've interpreted them right. And, these accounts take a lot of work to do, and we should try and get some value out of them. To me, it's unthinkable that we are so late in discussing them. It's more than 18 months after the year end before we've even, we've ducked it and ducked it and ducked it. So I really think we need to nail this reserves position. We need to know what the rules are. We need to have access to the rules, and we need to see and we need to have some common interpretation of those reserves.
So you've asked those questions, so let me pass over to Chris to answer them.
Yeah, I mean, I will respond in detail to your question, but I've got to sort of wrap up all the detail, and you put that in your email. So this is one of the questions I haven't had time to look at. But to sort of simplify it a little bit, is that the projected deficits are there, and the council has this. Sorry, I'm having to transport myself back a couple of years here, but the reserves are there in place, and it wouldn't be too dissimilar if we brought it up to the present day. So, as you rightly say, you would eventually run out of runway if you carried on spending your reserves. But the bit that's missing is the savings that the council puts through each year. So there is savings secured this year of about 5 point whatever it was million in 23-24, and we're still determining the exact figure at the moment, but it's a significant number for 24-25 as an example. If you go back 2 years, we would have been talking about 22-23 and 23-24 in the future. So the principle holds throughout, and I will sum that up in detail and illustrate it with the numbers from the accounts there in my response.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. And perhaps as a suggestion, we should put something in the accounts explaining that those numbers are pre-saving. I did look, I couldn't find anything there. Also, in terms of disclosure, what have we done about turnstone in these accounts, and are we going to see something more about it in the accounts for 2023 that are coming up this Friday?
You've answered the question, really. There will be more coming down the line in 2022, 23 accounts because of the timing of the arrangement.
Okay. And then the profit and loss, the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, which used to be called a profit and loss account. This is a statement that shows a turnover of 150 million. I've not seen anything in our management accounts of more than 50 million. So there's huge netting off going on in our management account. And no doubt it's logical. But I do think that as the financial accounts, the statutory accounts are our statutory financial perimeter, that we should be trying to make our management accounts more consistent with them and providing more of a bridge between the two. I'd expect the management accounts to at least nod to statutory accounting rather than going off on our own little journey.
They are very different, that's true, and that's recognised in the Redmond review, for example, whereby he talks about potentially some kind of bridging statement in the future. But the accounting rules are what they are at the moment, and it does, in fairness, it does actually reconcile the management accounts. If you look at note 5 in the accounts, that the management accounts are reconciled to the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. It's not easy, I'll give you that, but it is reconciled there, technically speaking. So, but I think it's entirely fair comment. It is difficult territory, but that is the nature of where we are at the moment, and all councils are in that position as well.
I just feel immensely uncomfortable about having so little understanding of the difference between the two and having to go back and try and reconcile. So the deficit is reconciled, and there's great big differences, really big numbers going backwards and forwards. And if one of those is wrong, you know, are we in trouble? It raises all those questions. The turnover question is sort of almost a bigger one. Are we in our management accounts showing our full activities, or are we showing a small part of our activities which are the most interesting to us? And that's, I think, only showing a third of your turnover in your management accounts is a real issue, even if the rest of it's mainly a pass-through, which I suspect it is. But I couldn't tell you. If you asked me how to get from 52 million, I spent hours on these accounts, to 150 million, I wouldn't know how to bridge that.
Right. I mean, I think that's a statement, so I'm not going to ask Mr. Hartgrove to respond to that.
Perhaps we could have a reconciliation of it.
Yeah.
And perhaps we could go through these. Perhaps we could have proper answers to these questions, and then shared with the committee. Maybe I'll be the only one, and Reece probably be the ones to look at it. But I think that would be worth doing.
No, I can assure you, I looked very carefully at Councillor Smithson's questions and the answers to Councillor Smithson earlier today. So I think it's as I was discussing with you when we had a break, I think it's imperative that we share the questions and the answers that you have with other members of the committee, so that we're all on side with where we're at with our accounts. Anything else, William, before I move on?
I've got loads else, but I'll spare you.
All right, thank you. Councillor King, I've got Councillor Smithson to ask me a question. Was this in response to something that Councillor Sunnox has just raised?
It is, and I know it's a long evening. I admire the persistence. I understand why. I just want to make sort of the position of the administration, I can speak for it, very clear, which is the path we're on is to get to the point where, with every respect to us and people listening, maybe listening, a layperson could understand some of these issues. And there is a real shortfall. I personally battled in this when I was in the role that Mark had for a couple of years, trying to get us to a better place. I thought, I marked my own homework, William, that we got a rather better place. But in the detail, there are all sorts of things. We've got to make sure that we're not only just technically correct, and those who love this stuff can look into the detail and find an answer. We've actually got to think about the bigger question about public understanding of what we're doing, and not least, without going into it now, we sort of know the answer in principle without any doubt, money washing through appropriately through our processes and accounts so that we can explain that to the public. So just want to make that plain. That will take a little time, I suspect, again, but that's the direction and heading that it will pass tests with the public. So I want to thank you for the persistence collectively and your patient absorption of it as well, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think to be fair to Andrew Small and to Chris Hartgrove, we saw some of the journey towards making them simpler with our Q1 accounts, didn't we? Which were neater, easier, tidier to read than we previously had come before G&A. So we'll keep fingers crossed that eventually we get there. Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased to know that my questions are not in any way technical. I have 4 questions which I'll rattle through, and then perhaps you can answer them all in one go. I see a reference to contingent liabilities in the accounts, but I don't see any detail as to what contingent liabilities we have. Are you able to give any information in respect of contingent liabilities? 2, we have a significant amount of grant income. Is any of that grant income, or was any of that grant income, repayable? There's the second question. I know, I appreciate, obviously, we're now looking back in time, so it could well have been repaid already. The property, plant and equipment figure has increased quite significantly from 2020 to 2021. What's the reason for that increase? And then what within the property, plant and equipment figure could realistically be used to realise value should we need to raise funds? Don't mind if you take the last one away. Thank you.
I think you may have to take more than 1 or 2 of those away, but I'll leave it to you. Catherine?
The first question is about contingent liabilities, and I wasn't aware, we sent an email around to management, and I'm not aware of any contingent liabilities that the authority has at the 31st of March 2022. And I missed the second question. I'm really sorry. Could somebody reiterate it?
You want to just
Yes.
reiterate?
Oh, sorry, Chair. Yes, so I noticed that we had a significant amount of grant income, and the question is whether any of that grant income is repayable or has been repaid.
Note to the account, note 9, I can find it, and it should detail. In second, I'm just finding it on the screen. Anyway, so yes, we do. In the balance sheet, you can see we've got a line called revenue grants receipts in advance. I think it's about 4.9 million. So on the balance sheet, you can see we've received 4.8 million of revenue grants, which were received in advance. But there is also other grants, which you might think is grants, that we had received in advance, but they were actually COVID grants, and they sit within the creditors line as well. So yes, any grants which are where we can't say that the conditions have been satisfied or where they're repayable sit in the balance sheet, either under revenue grants receipts in advance or in the creditors line where they are, where we're just acting as an agent, where we were giving out COVID grants to businesses. I could give you the figures for those, but I don't have them at my fingertips, the COVID grants at my fingertips, but I could get that for you if you were interested to know. But they do sit in the balance sheet, they don't sit anywhere else.
Does that answer?
Yes, that answers question 1 and 2. Then question 3 was, what was the reason for the increase in the property, plant and equipment figure? It's around 50 million.
A lot of it was on count, as you can see from note 4, quite a significant amount. I think it's like 30 million was to do with the council dwellings. And that is just where we get the properties valued. That's the valuer's opinion. And I guess that's related to the fact that property prices have gone up. But we've got an awful lot of property, plant and equipment. So I'd have to, go through each one and tell you which ones have significantly changed. I imagine, I don't know for sure because there's so much, I imagine because costs have gone up, so where we've got properties like the stadium, community stadium, which are valued at depreciated replacement cost, that will go up because it's more costly to rebuild it if we had to. So I could look at the list of assets and try and pick out some significant ones if you're interested, but there is just so many. I'd have to, look through them all to tell you what would cause them to go up. But we only increase the values in accordance with what the valuers tell us. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. If we could have a table of the most significant increases, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Is that doable? Great. Okay. So again, if you could send those to Matthew Evans, please, so that he can circulate them to all members, that would be really helpful. You said you had four questions, Councillor Smithson?
Mr. Hartgrove has agreed to take the last one away.
Last one away. So, right. Councillor Naylor, anything? All right. Councillor Harris? Councillor Jay? Councillor Smith? Councillor Sunnox, I'll give you the last word if you want it.
We should make sure that on the work programme, probably I'm taking this under the wrong item, we have a space to look at the 2023 accounts. I do regard scrutiny of the accounts as a major role for this committee.
And I totally agree with you. So yeah, we will ensure that happens. Right. In that case, I mean, we've been talking about looking at the 21-22 accounts for 12 months, 15 months now. We've finally had the opportunity to do that in detail. We're aware that they are still unaudited, but as Councillor Corey's already remarked, we've never, well, in my time on the council, we've never had auditors find anything significant to change the draft account. So I think we're in a fairly safe place, although, I'm always wary of making such statements. But we've had the opportunity to look through the draft statement of accounts. They've been published online, which is what I think many of us were seeking to happen. We've had the opportunity tonight to look through them in some detail and to seek some clarification. So I hope that we're feeling a lot more comfortable about discharging our obligations as the G&A committee after this evening with the 21-22 accounts. And as you quite rightly point out, Councillor Sunnox, we need to get to grips with the 22-23 accounts before we're looking at the end of the current financial year. Thank you very much, everyone. there was nothing else for us to do other than to do what we've just done. So that takes us on to the work programme. Item 12. Anything you want to draw our attention to, Mr. Evans?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, there have been a few changes to the work programme. They are set out in the report and in the schedule of meetings, which is attached to or as part of the report. We have got a provisional meeting, potentially what it is, has been arranged in theory for February next year if it's needed. So there's nothing has been assigned to that meeting yet, but perhaps if the 2023 accounts are to come back, that will be something that I could go away and speak to officers about the appropriate time to schedule that in and potentially assess what is currently on the work programme for the meetings that are scheduled, just to make sure that everything can be dealt with in the proper time, if you're happy with that, anyway.
Thank you. And I mean, our next meeting, the big one, is likely to be the capital expenditure outturn. I think that's likely to take us, take a bit of our time that evening. And the Q2 monitoring report. Councillor Smith?
Could I ask that the overview of the council's housing stock be moved to the December meeting, as I can't unfortunately make the November one, and I do have a rather significant part of council housing in my ward, as do other members. So, given that it looked a fairly discrete piece of work, I would ask that perhaps we could move that.
I mean, looking at I know we jiggled the two meetings because most of if not all of the items on the 13th of December are your lead, aren't they, Mr. Weaver? If the committee's happy to move that, then I'm happy. Those who think it's a good idea? Yeah, I'm seeing nods around the table, so we will move that then to 13th of December. Is that Mr. Hartgrove? And do you know if that's okay for you and or Andrew Smalls to attend? Yeah, good. Okay. Councillor Sunnox?
Does that leave a space open for getting to grips with the 2023 accounts in the space that's left?
Will we have them ready by then? Yeah, no, November 28th.
The 14 days before
the
publication.
I thought they were published this Friday.
We should do, but I can't guarantee it, to be honest. We're hoping to publish before then, if it fits in with the timetable, etc. So yes, we should be able to do that, but I can't guarantee it.
Right, so can I suggest then, before I bring Councillor Smithson in, that we put that in as a penciled item for the 28th of November, subject to our Section 151 officers having them ready. Councillor Smithson?
I was just thinking about timing. I can't imagine that the overview of the council's housing stock was going to be a particularly long item, whereas the accounts will be.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And that's why, and I've got a feeling that we're likely to spend a fair bit of time on the capital expenditure as well as Q2 budget monitoring report. So I think...
Can I make a suggestion that we move item 8 as well then? The polling.
I think item 8 we have to deal with then from a time...
okay.
Yeah.
Chair, sorry, yes, you have to, excuse me, you have to deal with item 8 at that meeting because it has to go into council in December.
Yeah. And that usually doesn't take us very long anyway, unless there's a particular contentious change to a polling office or a polling district.
Chair, can I just give you a reassurance about the polling district and place review? It's going to be a very, very light touch, because we can't undertake a full review at this point in time because of the electoral review being underdone by the Local Government Boundary Commission. So it's just it'll be just a very light touch review around a few polling stations that are causing us a few issues at the moment around accessibility.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. So, I mean, we'll probably deal with that in minutes. So I suppose I'll come back to, I know we were just saying 22-23 accounts to come to the 28th of November, even with the Q2 outturn and the capital expenditure. All happy with that? It means that we're probably going to be here for a lengthy meeting again.
I would agree with Councillor Smith, and I think you're putting an awful lot into that agenda. I mean, as I'm not going to be here, personally, I'd be delighted for you to be here all night dealing with it, but I think it perhaps is being a little bit optimistic to put all that into that agenda, given how long it's taken tonight to go through the 2021, this year, the accounts we've been looking at this evening.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll pencil it in, and then prior to, I'll have a discussion, assuming Councillor Smithson, you are still the spokesperson for the Conservative group, you and I can have a discussion about whether or not if we keep that in or we move it to another meeting, depending on where our Section 151 officer is at as well at that time. Okay, right. Anything else on the work programme that anyone wanted to raise? No? In that case, we just need to approve that subject to the penciled in that we've just agreed. Right. Thank you very much. I think that is everything, isn't it? Yeah. Thanks everyone for your contributions this evening, to our officers for their submissions, and to Mr. Hartgrove and to Ms. Jobling, who's still online with us, I think, for your contributions over the last hour or so. Good night, one and all.